Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Remember, friends, if you treat your employees right, they'll stick around. And that's worth more than a handful of pinched pennies. Our first story describes such a situation. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Sit comfortably. Here we go. The story of Steve and Jim. I want to work by the hour. This isn't my story, but of a friend of mine I'm going to call Steve. He owns a landscaping business and has several employees. They work hard and get along really well. Steve pays them for their work done by the yard, not by the hour, in addition to buying his workers 2 meals a day. Steve hired a guy named Jim, who isn't a bad worker at all. Jim's just a little slow on the uptake sometimes. Jim decided to start a fuss. I don't like that we're getting paid by the yard, he told Steve one day. I want to be paid by the hour. Steve explained to Jim that when you break it down, being paid by the yard comes out to over $10 an hour, about $22 in today's money, and this was back in the 80s, or more depending on how many yards get done, and his hourly workers only make minimum wage. Steve further explained that the paid by the yard workers get perks like meals and operate on a true merit pay because the more they get done, the more they get paid. Jim was adamant though, so Steve agreed. Day 1. Jim showed up ready and raring to go. He decided, it appeared, to prove to Steve that being hourly doesn't mean he'll slack off. Like I said, Jim's a good guy and not a bad worker. He has a good work ethic and a big sense of pride. A couple yards got done and it's lunchtime. Steve grabs everyone's order and asks Jim if he's going to buy anything. Jim looked confused. What do you mean? Steve re-explained. If you're going hourly, I can't cover your meals anymore. You'll have to buy your own lunch. Jim grumbled but ordered something small, and after lunch, they all got back to work. Day 2. The crew was down 2 guys. Jim was in a good mood, maybe out of schadenfreude, because less guys on the crew meant less yards got done, but Jim was going to make the same amount either way. With a little bit of smug attitude, Jim got ready for work, but when he looked at the job list for the day, he looked taken aback. Steve had rearranged the yards for the week so that for this particular day, they would be working on their smallest yard clients. That way, the workers would get paid around the same amount they normally would if they had a full crew. Jim hadn't noticed that Steve did this anytime he had a smaller crew, both because it guaranteed his guys were making over the legally required minimum for per part work and because it kept their pay consistent. Day 3. They got lots of yards done this day. In fact, they worked really well together that day and really dug their heels in to get the last few yards on the schedule done. They'd taken about 2 hours less than expected, so everybody was able to head home early. Jim asked if he could maybe go take on another yard or 2 himself since everyone got off early. He wouldn't be paid anymore. Steve understood and sent Jim out to get some hedges done, which took a couple hours because he was doing it by himself. But that was okay, because that was a couple extra hours of pay and Steve was nothing if not fair. Day 4. Jim showed up to work a little late because the extra 3 hours of hedge trimming had left him more exhausted than expected. Steve was placing an order for breakfast as he showed up, and he just stood there for a few minutes as he watched Steve writing down orders for bacon and eggs and pancakes. Finally, Steve stopped at Jim. Steve didn't say anything about Jim's tardiness. It was clear Jim had worked hard the previous night. You buying anything, Jim? Jim swallowed hard. No, sir. It'll be mighty hard to work on an empty stomach, Jim. Jim nodded. Yes, sir, I know. I mentioned how much pride Jim had, and he really couldn't buck up enough to admit he had miscalculated. He knew he was wrong, but he was prepared to suffer. Steve, however, was a good dude. He recognized where Jim had erred and didn't lord it over him. He made it plain and simple. I'll just put you down for some eggs and bacon then. And with an understanding and appreciative look, Jim started packing the truck for the morning. They never really discussed moving back to per yard rate, but Steve was nothing if not fair. Jim got his next paycheck to find out that he'd been paid per yard as if they hadn't changed his rate at all. This meant not only did he end up with a better rate, but he even got some extra in his paycheck for the 3 yards worth of hedges he'd done by himself. Jim stuck around for a long time and ended up managing the crew after a while. Edit. This was the mid-'80s. $10 an hour then was about $22 an hour today. Steve is an amazing guy. The world needs more people like him. And I'm glad Jim learned a valuable lesson. And our next story. You threaten my job, I take yours. This happened last year. I was about 6 months into a food service job at the time. I worked in my university's cafeteria prepping and serving food to the students. After closing, I took about 45 minutes to finish cleaning up my station and took another 10 to finish up one of my coworker sections that she needed a bit of help with. My supervisor had left just after closing to God knows where, leaving the rest of us to our devices as he usually did. He was more the watch and rule type. After I'd finished, I took a quick 5-minute trip to the bathroom, as I usually did around this time every day. As I happily walked to the back to assist in helping the others finish so we could all leave, I hear a cough behind me. The sound of the calm before the storm. I ignore it, thinking nothing of it, and go on my way. I hear a more abrupt ahem, and I stop and turn on my heel to meet the shift supervisor's cold gaze, his hands crossed over his puffed chest in his regal stance. I give him a questioning look as he looks on me, expecting to read his mind. Supervisor, a half an hour? He asks calmly, but with a sour tinge to his tone. Me, confused, I chuckle. Huh? This was apparently the worst thing I could have done. You were in the bathroom for half an hour? He yelled, stomping his royal foot. I was taken aback, as he'd never come at me with such a sideways tone before. I thought we were cool, but I should have known better seeing how he treated his coworkers. I was so shocked I just stood there, staring at him like he grew 3 horns. I didn't feel the need to defend myself in the moment, as I knew the words he was spitting my way were pure BS. Do you like your job? He demanded from me. I did not, in fact, like my job. I had trouble holding back my smile as he yelled some more things I don't remember, as my ears had gone numb to his screeching at this point. I knew he had no power to fire me, as I hadn't even seen his mug for the past hour. I knew his words had no consequence. I had nothing to say to this tantrum, and as soon as he realized that, he dismissed me. I have trouble egging people on when they're being so irrational, so generally I stay quiet and let them get out their baby fit. I quickly went back to my work and started scheming about how I could get back at this man. Over the next week, I compiled photo evidence of him slacking on the job, serving undercooked food, and statements from my coworkers about their individual experiences where he ridiculed or threatened them, and I took it straight to my boss that Friday. I laid out all of my evidence and my personal encounter, which they then would be able to check the cameras and identify both of our whereabouts that day and could see who truly was off duty for a half an hour. I didn't think much would come of it, as I was a relatively new worker, and honestly, I didn't care about anything that happened to that hellhole. I let it slip from my mind for the weekend. The next Monday, I come in before most and start setting up. After a while, the general manager comes out of the back with the supervisor following her like a puppy, staring at his feet. He walks sheepishly up to me and invites me to sit with him at one of the tables in the cafeteria, where he admits to me that he was in the wrong, shouldn't have yelled at me like that, should be a better leader, is super duper sorry, all that, yada yada. I sat there with the biggest grin on my face as he practically groveled at my feet, begging for forgiveness, as his boss watched on. This man that sat so high on his horse for the past 6 months. I watched on in celebration as he then apologized to each of my coworkers individually. Not but a week later, he was demoted to a backroom cook, and I had been given the role of shift supervisor. We never had a problem after that, and he was generally a okay guy. I hope he really did learn his lesson. He didn't say all those things just to get it over with. Either way, this was the sweetest revenge of my life. I've since quit that job and work for a company with people who actually know how to respect others as individuals, whether their position is below or above their own. And our last story. Success is my revenge, and kindness is my weapon. I work as a free sampler, so I make food and serve it and explain the product details to potential buyers. The items to which I'm assigned I tend to sell out. This will be important for the revenge. At my work, we have a few important rules. Your name tag has to be visible, you get 1 half-hour break, unpaid, and if you're going to bring food home, you have to put it away in the office. I have a coworker that even the boss cannot stand. She's never friendly toward customers, constantly grimacing at people. She wears her name tag flipped backward so that people do not report her by name. She told me this months ago. She takes an extended break every day, always an hour, and at least 4 bathroom breaks per day of close to 10 minutes. Let's call her Grimace. Yesterday, she got personal. I got my boyfriend's mom a job where I work because the money's good. While she isn't my mother-in-law yet, she will be known as mother-in-law here. Remember that you have to put it away in the office rule? She tricked mother-in-law into packing things away outside of the office in front of the cameras, trying to get her in trouble, it would seem. Oh, don't let shift lead see you take things home. She hates that, and she tells the manager everything. This leads takes food home more than anyone and doesn't care if people do. Grimace knows this. Mother-in-law, being new, doesn't. Grimace has serious disdain for me because I'm really proud of my work. I'm good at the job and am never ashamed to show actual happiness because it's good work. She seems to think I'm annoying and an overachiever for this. Understandable. However, she didn't know until yesterday that mother-in-law and I were even connected how we are. After she found that out is when the food thing happened. So now every time Grimace is stationed near me, I give the best happy performance of my job ever. I get a lot of compliments on how nice I am and how my energy never seems to fade. It doesn't, because I love my work. I now just put on a show, glancing at her every time I make a sale while she sits at her cart, glaring at everything that walks by. I'm selling the store out of items left and right. My goal is to make her look as awful as I can. A couple of customers have asked me for her name because they want to report her for being genuinely mean. Can't read her name tag, so I give them her name and directions on where to find my boss. Customer service is fun. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.